Peter Schiff predicts home prices will come crashing down. What a prediction. We're going to talk about one of his most recent podcasts here, what he talked about home prices. JP Morgan pulls back on home equity loans. We see the tightening of the lending is becoming more extreme, and that could put more downward pressure on home prices. We're going to talk about that. We're also going to talk about the commercial real estate bubble. It's likely to also pop, and that's more risk for banks. So let's get started. Now, we have been talking about the housing market quite a lot lately with everything that's been happening with the lockdown financial crisis, what some people are calling it. But like we talked about before, home prices were very overinflated. This crisis, this lockdown crisis, is just the pin that popped the bubble. When we talked about this a few days ago, and we've been speaking about this, a lot more recently since this has been happening, but we haven't seen too many well-known economists really predicting major bloodshed in the housing market. But now we have Peter Schiff out there, and we're going to go ahead and take a listen to a excerpt out of his recent podcast. Take a listen.
Financial crisis. That's why the real estate crisis was a financial crisis. It wasn't because real estate prices went down. It's because real estate prices going down meant loans that were collateralized by real estate weren't getting repaid. And to the extent that the banks had to foreclose, the collateral wasn't there to make the banks whole. The same thing is happening now, right? The banks are even more exposed today than they were in 2008. This is an even bigger crisis now than it was in 2008 because we have a lot more debt. We have a lot more borrowers who are in trouble. And on top of all that, on top of all the borrowers who are in trouble because of these shutdowns, homeowners are going to have the same problems because real estate prices are about to crash. I'm going to get to that in a little later in the podcast meanwhile, the price of existing homes is going to be plunging. And again, I went over this on my last podcast. The lenders are really clamping down on lending standards, making it much harder for homeowners or potential home buyers to qualify for a mortgage. And they're requiring big down payments now, 20%. Who knows? Maybe some of them are going to start to want 25 or 30%. We'll see. But 20% is a big obstacle if you're buying a home in an expensive market. How many people have a 20% down payment in California?
All right, so there you go. Now, a couple key phrases out of his little rant there, and it's about an hour-long podcast. I'll link to it if you want to look at the whole podcast. I'm sure most of you have heard Peter's work, at some point over the years, but he used a couple key phrases there. Home prices are going to come crashing down. Right? That's a pretty bold statement now. Now, I think home prices will come down. No, I don't think they're going to come crashing down, not exactly. I think he tends to use words that kind of grab people's attention. But it depends on your definition. I mean, I think it's going to be a pretty big decline, but a crash, not so much. It could play out over the course of a few months, which some people could call a crash because you know that home prices and sales move slower than, of course, the stock market. Buying and selling of homes sometimes takes several months with everything that's involved. But you can see his point, and it does sound a lot like what we've been talking about here. If they tighten up lending, that is going to be a big driver of home prices weakening, and the housing market could get very ugly. And we're going to talk about commercial real estate also here in just a moment. But just to revisit what we've been talking about here, when the housing market, we know that JP Morgan has now really tightened its lending, 700 credit score, 20% down. We've talked about that in a couple videos. But now also home equity lines of credit are going to be harder to get, and that's going to really be a trouble spot for many homeowners. Let's talk about that. Recent article right here, JP Morgan Chase stops accepting HELOC applications, that's home equity lines of credit, due to the uncertainty in the markets. And this is again something else that's going to likely put downward pressure on home prices when sellers lose their lifeline. And for many people, these home equity lines of credit were a lifeline when times got hard, or when they wanted to make upgrades to their home, or when just they fell behind. Like so many people are doing now, home equity is a big thing that they like to pull out and go to as a rescue method. You take that away, that's going to really start to pile up more and more homeowners in a desperate financial position. And we'll have to see if this bleeds over into owners of multiple homes, like investors and corporations and institutions. But we do know that when the banks tighten lending, because this market is so over leveraged, that it could very easily cause a price decline. Now, anything could happen. I'm not making a prediction here on the virus situation. There could be a drug that comes out. There could be a treatment, or time could just have this thing fade away. Anything could happen, but there is a very big possibility of a major correction in the housing market that all of us have been looking at and expecting for a long time. But this is something that, again, could drive it much quicker and down a lot harder than most people had anticipated. Let's talk about commercial real estate. Bloomberg article right here. Fight over commercial rent gets ugly with default wave looming. So many banks are also on the hook for commercial real estate. And this is also a very over leveraged sector of the U.S. economy, is commercial real estate. Pretty much everything's in a bubble. But commercial real estate, another big area to watch. In some areas, up to 80% of commercial property leaseholders did not pay their rent in April. Then this comes back to the landlords, to the owners of these. And again, many of these owners went out and took out commercial loans for these buildings, for these office buildings, for these strip malls. And again, another over leveraged part of the economy that also is at risk, especially with the huge numbers of retailers that are not paying their rent. And I'll just read an excerpt out of here. So far this month, some mall owners got as little as 15% of what they were owed, according to an estimate. Now, in some cases, landlords, they've been working with their tenants. Landlords have been pitching rent deferment, saying tenants can make reduced payments now as long as they pay the balance at some point. But again, like we talked about, deferments are not a long-term solution, because when the deferment is done, when it's ended, you have to go back and pay that amount that you did not pay. So it's not free rent by any means. So it's not a get out of jail free card for many of these businesses. So we're going to see how this plays out. But so far it looks very, very risky for the banks and the landlords. Now, anything could happen. Again, the banks could get bailed out to infinity, and I wouldn't be surprised. But the fact that banks are pulling back does lead us to believe that the banks are not so confident that the bailouts are going to be there endlessly. And let's read another section here out of this Bloomberg article. Many landlords are rushing to work out deals with lenders to stave off their own defaults. So now we not only have homeowners calling and begging the banks for relief and forbearance and forgiveness, we now have landlords of commercial property also trying to call their banks and get some sort of forbearance, at the same time as negotiating with their tenants also on forbearance. So pretty much everything is up in the air right now. And again, this is very risky, and we'll have to keep an eye on it for you. We're going to go ahead and wrap this up, but before we go, I just wanted to let you know that I did update our seed page with seeds that are now in stock, because many of these seed sellers on Amazon were selling out. And CBS reported here, seed companies can't keep up as more Americans turn to growing their own food. So this is another area to watch, because you not only have the lockdowns and the layoffs affecting people's incomes. With everybody being on lockdown, more people are turning to gardening, and that in itself causes a greater demand for seeds. But also we have the supply chain and the food shortages and the panic buying that people are doing in many of these grocery stores, also causing food shortages. Another reason to get seeds. So please check the link below if you're interested. It does help out the channel if you go to the link down there and you go and buy something. So that would be amazing if you could help out this channel and also help yourself. Get some seeds. You don't want to have seeds be sold out and then all of a sudden see more food shortages if this virus continues several months into the future, even into next year. Imagine what could happen with the food supply and even the seeds at this point. It's going to be about all for this update. Please give us a thumbs up if you like what we talked about. If you got anything out of this video, please subscribe and come back for more. That helps us. Also, another great thing, just leave a comment down below. So many great comments. Ultimately, we're going to do a video here at least once a week. We're going to start rolling out videos of just your comments. and me trying to answer maybe some of the questions, or just kind of go over and highlight some of the comments that I feel are great. But you all are great. Thank you so much for being here. Hope you're well and staying afloat in this crazy time in America, in world history, as we see the economy begin to transform, and the economy may not recover when this lockdown ends, because a lot of damage is going to be done, and a lot of people are not going to spend like they used to even after the lockdowns are done. So something to think about, and we're going to keep an eye on it for you. Thanks everybody so much for being here. Bye for now.